All right, what do you think, Kees? Should we get
Yeah,
started? See how I'm sure some people will jump in here and there,
we'll
but
join, huh?
yeah.
We can start. And so thank you, Nathan. Welcome, everyone, to yet another webinar in and with the Links project. My name is Kees Boersma. I'm the PI of the Links project, and together with Nathan, I'm coordinating the things that we do in the Links project. And Nathan then also asked me to share this meeting. So it is a meeting to think about and rethink social media and crowdsourcing in disaster management in different scenarios, in different contexts, and also in the different phases of the disaster management cycle as we define them, but then also in particular in the phase of preparation and potential also prevention, and to see how social media in terms of a data source can be of a helping hand, and to what sort of issues are we running into. Would we take that source of data more seriously for what we do in disaster management? And we then is scholars and practitioners alike. And that can bring about a really interesting conversation. So for today, actually, we invited two experts in the field. So welcome to you all. I will briefly tell a bit about you and also the setup of the whole webinar. But once you start talking, please also explain your expertise and your experience, so that we can have a really engaged discussion. So we have Valerio Lorini, really an expert in disaster risk reduction, working at the EU Joint Research Center in ISPRA. And we're really curious, Valerio, to pick your brain on the issues that we are of interest in the Links project and beyond, so social media in particular. Chiara Proietti, a data analyst, I think also working with EASE Joint Research Center, but also in particular in the context of healthcare and healthcare-related issues, societal issues, and dynamic work environments. And then we have Jorge Gomes, a Chief Operation Officer at FOST Portugal. And as you may know, the FOST ambition is really also to engage citizens in times of disasters, but also in preparation, prevention, with also an eye on new technologies, particularly also social media. So what we did in advance, Nathan and I, together with the three experts, is propose a series of questions that we asked you to reflect upon, and then enroll into the discussion that we have in the Links project and beyond about social media in the context of disasters. So if I may, Chiara, I would like to start with you, and so we sent you that question, but I can repeat that question that you can reflect upon. So there are many social media systems and information systems being integrated. In particular, also with the global disaster alert and coordination system. So quite a mouthful. And that has to do with the alert phase. But then how do you perceive that, think about that also in the different other phases of disaster management, the response phase? And can you also provide some examples in which social media data was key to improve some components in disaster management, for example, situation awareness?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kees, for your nice introduction, and good afternoon, everybody, to the all participants, and thanks for organizing this occasion for brainstorming. Also, from my point of view, I will provide the feedback also on the operational use of social media that here at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission we have been doing so far. But before starting, with going directly into the social media, I will provide a bit of background on what is GDAX to understand which are the needs that we are facing, and also how we try to manage them and to cover them with the use of social media. So explaining briefly GDAX represents a collaborative initiative between the European Commission and the United Nations. So it started in 2004 when we decided to join our effort. On the European Commission side, the Joint Research Center is responsible for the multi-hazard early warning part of GDAX. So it means an heads-up system based on impact estimation for humanitarians. So to know if a disaster if an event could or not evolve into a disaster. And we consider also the coping capacity of the country in our algorithm to understand if the country is able to cope or not with that disaster, and in case they could request humanitarian assistance. Then there is a session that is managed by UNOCHA, so from United Nations, the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that is the virtual OSOC. So it's the virtual on-site operation coordination center. This is mostly the tent that is installed to manage a disaster by the United Nations. But this is virtual, so as soon as the disaster strikes, all the humanitarians at the global level start to exchange information and data about the ongoing disaster to understand which is the real impact on that. And then if it is a real disaster and the humanitarian need is needed, then the real tent is installed on the affected area. And then there is also the satellite mapping component that is mostly the coordination of who is mapping what and where. And next year will be 20 years of operation. So we have more than 40,000 registered organization and humanitarians, but also citizens that want to be informed about the impact of disasters around the globe. But we are keep asking us a key question, which is still GDAX after 20 years fit for purpose, which is because also the technology, as you also said, evolve. So are we still using the cutting-edge technology, and also the information need of the humanitarians of the disaster management evolves. But we saw years ago now, we saw a key gap, information gap in the aftermath of a disaster. So which is the real impact between the impact estimation of our models and the impact information that came usually hours after the disasters directly from the media or from the national authorities that communicate about the disaster. But in the meantime, that everybody, since the disaster occurs, in these first hours, we have this information gap that we need to cover from estimation, impact estimation to impact assessment. And this is where the social media play a huge role in this. And we have been doing this scraping via expert assessment on the social media since years to catch the first videos or communication from the affected area. But it's a huge amount of information there. And this is where the initiative led by Valerio, that he will talk about that. Fortunately, we had this in-house expertise in the JRC, and they do this automatic analysis of huge amount of information to prioritize and to try to provide us with the key information of the impact from the field with a realistic as much as possible impact information. And this is crucial, the case, because we have been trained the models for years now, but a very operational use of this information was for from the night of February, the 6th of February this year, with the 7.8 earthquake in Turkey and Syria. When it struck, there was the desperate need. All the humanitarian community was looking. Also, the European Civil Protection Mechanism was activated by Turkey, and everybody was struggling to get information on what was going on from the field. And fortunately, through this collaboration, we managed at first to get information from the people that were stuck under the rubble. And thanks to the collaboration with Boersma and Jorge, we'll talk about that, we got georeference data from the people that were communicating from social media under the rubble. And we provided this information to the search and rescue teams on the field. And then also they were able to provide us with information on the critical infrastructure, also because there were growing concerns from the team on the field that were asking, are we safe operating downstream of a dam? And also mostly Valerio provided us with automatic extracted data of the affected dam, also with images and information. We provide dam discharge models based on the potential, to estimate the potential impact of this. There are limitations for sure. At the moment, we already identify them, mostly how to retrieve the data from social media coming from authoritative sources, because this is crucial, but to do it automatically. Also, the language in this case is a barrier, because the models have to be trained with local terminology, with the local languages, and also to try to ensure the flexibility of the different, to try to adapt the system to the different social media platforms that you were referring to. But fortunately, we have this in-house expertise with the social media for disaster risk management initiative, and I still thank them for this support. Then I hope that I try to manage to your question. So in
Yeah.
case I'm here to reply.
No, but thank you. And even more than that, it's really inspiring also to see how you start working with the humanitarian sector, not only in terms of coordination efforts like in UN OCHA, but then also in how to deal with that huge amount of data that then sometimes is you should take an effort to analyze the data, make sense of the data, and so forth and so on. Before I go to Valerio, because then I'm curious, okay, about all that generated data, how to deal with that, is you are mainly referring to things like needs assessments and the response phase. But early on in your introduction, you also refer to the coping mechanisms and coping capacity of member states and or European countries. And you was referring to early warning systems, right? So is that also something that is of concern for you in relation to the topics that you are addressing?
Yeah, also because as GDAX, we don't have the mandate to alert the population. The mandate to alert the population is up to the member state. But we provide with a global algorithm for the humanitarians. So it is crucial in this case to collaborate with the national authorities, or for example, also now there is this crucial initiatives led by WMO together with UNDRR, that is early warning for all.
Right.
That for in the next years, all citizens in the world should be targeted by early warning system, should be able to be alerted. And this is crucial also to start the analysis of the social media, because as soon as an early warning is issued, then the process could start, and all the information that are needed could be already on the table to be analyzed and provided to the decision makers, and in case of a huge disaster as the Turkey and Syria earthquake, to the people that are, for example, in this case, the search and rescue teams.
Yeah. No, thank you. Really, really fascinating. Good work. So yeah, and then talking about data and data coming from different sources that you are also already started to refer to, data generated by formal authorities versus data generated by non-authoritative sort of sources, and other than formal authorities. And Valerio, we posted that question to you. Is how can you define who is formal authority in a context in which so many different actors and but also citizens, right, are affected by the disaster, by the crisis, generating also that data. So how do you deal with that authoritative user generated data versus non-authoritative user generated data? How do you deal with the data and coming from different data sources? So what's your take on that, given your experience?
Thanks a lot, Kees, for the question and the introduction, and thanks to Chiara also for her introduction of our tools. Indeed, we actually, my research, since I am a computer scientist, I have a PhD in artificial intelligence, and so I am a software, let's say, developer, researchers in algorithm and artificial intelligence. So my what we wanted to see is to try to use the expertise or to apply artificial intelligence to crisis response or to crisis management, disaster risk reduction. When we talk about authoritative data here, at least here at the Joint Research Center at the European Commission, we refer to the data that are also called traditional data for crisis responders, for the organization that has somehow mandates for dealing with the crisis. I consider authoritative data, for instance, the meteorological data that we can collect before, during, and after an event, but also satellite images coming from Copernicus, for instance, when a member state has triggered the acquisition of satellite images, or observation from local authorities, for instance, in somehow in some places where you have an emergency, a flood, for instance. There was once I remember that we were in Genova in Italy, and where a lot of times you have flash floods, and they developed their own way of understanding the seriousness of the floods. At the time, they were saying that actually they had the police cars going around the cities and actually looking at if the water was below the tires of the car or not, and so that was a very good rule. So any type of information can help during the disaster response, and if it comes from an authoritative source, for someone that is organized to deal with data, is considered somehow validated without noise. While if it comes from users on social network, are considered non-authoritative, and they can be biased. They are not validated. They have they may have problems because they report a situation that is not happening. So what we do with we thought, starting in 2016-17, we thought that social media could help, as Chiara already explained, to, let's say, fill the gap between the risk analysis and the impact assessment during a disaster. So the sooner we can get some ground truth data that is really ground truth, we can also then start or ignite a good feedback or a cycle where we can provide feedback to the authoritative sources, or we can select better the authoritative data as well, or we can highlight, for instance, areas that are not taken into consideration based on static data. For instance, we, through the social media, during the Haiti earthquake in 2020, I think, we were able to spot some roads that were closed or damaged. So we included them into an area of interest that was not taken into consideration in the beginning. And what we do, since we started working in the framework of the Copernicus Emergency Management Services, we started working with floods. We use authoritative data in order to understand where an area we have different data that can tell us where it's going to rain, the condition of the soil. We have a hydrological model that can somehow forecast with a certain degree of certainty if there could be a flood in the next 24 or 48 hours. So we take this into consideration and we start monitoring social media. Then, starting with this first experiment, we at the CRC, we are in between, let's say, research. There is pure research and academia on one side, and the crisis responders or crisis managers on the other side. So we cannot work on one single event and then to prepare the next article or to do the next study. We wanted to go, if we decide to do a tool, such a tool, we needed to do it for all the events, or this is the target, for all the events, for all the languages, and that covers the globe, because that's the mandate of Copernicus, and the natural next step is to integrate our data in GDAX. That is what Chiara was mentioning. So to do that actually is a project of, it becomes a project of applied artificial intelligence. Is a project. So to do that, we needed to have an infrastructure that is scalable, that works 24/7, 365 days, of course, with some hiccups because we are a research center. And so we decided to start immediately to build machine learning models that could annotate these thousands or millions of tweets for relevance to disaster, but also to impacts. I'm not going into the detail, but we can discuss, or you can ask me if you are interested in that. The point is that we needed to work towards an operational system that is reliable and is so it has to be fast also in reacting because as we said, when an event starts, we have to immediately start providing information. I'm not the only one working on this. The research is now these models that we use for annotating social media or user-generated data for what it matters is mature. We have seen several examples. So the step that we wanted to do further, which is what we have done, is to use this model or to ask ourselves, okay, we are good in doing classification of data. What do we do now? So we started working with crisis responders or practitioners in order to understand the real needs and to understand why they are not using the social media data. That is why we started with a task force of researchers and practitioners, because we understood in the beginning that practitioners and researchers speak two different languages. It's like they are from two different worlds. So we wanted to create this task force, and we started also a workshop, which is a yearly workshop. And Jorge is one of the members of this task force, and he's also one of the big sponsor and promoter of this task force, and he is very involved into our work. What we started doing then is to decide and to check how we could serve our model and data to help crisis responders. And that is how we get to the example that Chiara was doing of the Turkey earthquake, the earthquake in Turkey. We used our platform to collect data in real time, to filter them in real time, And then we started looking at the data and to think about what to do. I mean, we had already models that were able to be adapted for special needs. In our case, then we were able to detect impact, and we started detecting impact on critical infrastructure. So we had some taxonomy of data, and we filtered out images, images, but also text that were relevant for impacts in a specific, specific infrastructure. So when we needed to look at dams, for instance, we were able to see and to check that there were dams. When then we realized that there was a need for people requesting, because probably in this case there were the phone system had some problems or others. Then it was quite immediate with Jorge. We talked a bit and we decided we said, okay, well, we are collecting a lot of data. What can we do? The crisis responders, they told us straight in the beginning, they've been clear with us. They say, listen, we need to look for our safety. We don't have any big computer to digest your data. So because we sent data in a straight format, tabular format, and they say, no, we can't do anything with this data. So then with the help of Jorge, we were able to automatically detect a city or a zone or an area, and then they were able overnight actually to check the good messages and to detect them at the level of the street. And that was a great example of how and where and how far we can go with a collaboration between digital expert in the domain, which are also volunteer like FOST, and the operational tool, and the need of having someone that is expert in the field of crisis management, but is also savvy about the technologies that can be used, because having the guy in the crisis room, the IT guy, as it was once, is not enough. It's not enough at the moment. We need something more, because the data is increasing, is expanding. And so when you have a lot of more data, you have to deal also with problems that comes for misinformation, for instance. Although the natural disasters are still a bit safe, because you don't have people putting picture of a fake disaster. What you can find is people maybe by mistake retweeting an image that has been already done, or it comes from another disaster. So you need to be a bit careful, but this can be done with some tools, automated tools.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you so much. Really knowledgeable explanation of what you are doing, and also the challenges you are running into. I definitely recognize there's sometimes two different worlds of researchers and practitioners that sometimes don't speak each other's language. So and you are coming up with I think what you call a co-design of solutions, right? So really co-creating the solutions that we are looking for. Just as one follow-up question before I go to George is again your take on validating data. So sort of per definition, you said, hey, data from authoritative sources is validated. At least you consider that to be validated. But I think and when you look at actual practices, and that's my question to you, they can be with good intentions, but they can be proven wrong down the line. Versus data from non-authoritative sources, they can be very useful and maybe in the end the correct information. So my question then is, shouldn't we rethink, we validate data from all those sources in this particular context of disasters? And shouldn't we sort of not abandon completely, but rethink the traditional way we do validation of data? What's your take on that?
Let me check if I understood your question. You are mentioning about the validation of the authoritative data using non-authoritative data.
Yeah, or even presenting their own data, you consider that to be validated, right? So if data is, that's at least what I understood from your explanation, data from authoritative sources they are considered to be validated. But, and again, not with asking their intentions, but and it can be with good intention, but down the line they can be proven wrong because hey, there's a difference. So how do you deal with that constantly evolving situation versus evaluating data from the different sources?
Okay, now I understand the question, but I think what you are saying is interesting and can be done, but more on the authoritative data that are probabilistic, let's say, because we have the deterministic data, and in that case, I mean, if you don't consider this validated, then you have to you cannot do anything. But for the probabilistic data, then you can actually use such information. For instance, a forecast is usually a probabilistic model, is an ensemble, no, of different. You get the input data, and you have different perturbation of the initial condition, and you have a simulation. In that case, non-authoritative data could help giving a feedback to the model and say, listen, your model is going towards this type of simulation. So you have to take this simulation more into consideration than another one, for instance. Or I think we used and we push for the use of our data also with our colleagues at rapid mapping team within Copernicus, because and from time to time we exchange information, because when they have to come up with the area of interest, and you have, for instance, an earthquake, you usually use the area of the shake maps. You use some information that you have available at the moment, but some structure or some places may be affected due to all the buildings or some other data that are not there and not validated. So in this case, the dynamic data coming from users or citizen science can be very helpful in determining where the real event is happening and how it is evolving. Also because, again, Earth observation are very good. But if you have a flood that is building and receding, you take a picture only at a certain moment. If you get this moment wrong, you don't get the maximum extent, or you get an information which is somehow out of which is different than the real image. Or again, in city, for instance, where you have floods, urban floods, if you have tall buildings, narrow roads, a lot of glasses, if you don't have leader data from the space, it's difficult to see the extent of a disaster.
Yeah. Okay. Very clear answer, Valerio. Thank you. And,
Okay, so
and then, yeah.
before we jump to George, we have one question in the chat, and
Okay.
I've also got a question if we can pose
Maybe
it.
you can raise them, Nathan, or?
Yeah, quickly, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. First, I have a follow-up question. So thanks a lot, Valerio, for the explanation. Really nice. Maybe you can go a little bit more into depth about how you did the dam analysis for Turkey. So if I understood correctly, you used was it just satellite imagery and then ground truthing through social media pictures of the damage, or how did you assess that the infrastructure was safe for first responders to approach? If I also understood Chiara's point earlier. That's my question one.
No, actually, we didn't assess the safety of the dams. We were just, it was, I think, Chiara, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was one of the first reports generated after the events. And so they wanted to check what was the extent of the damages and which infrastructure were involved potentially, in order to then, again, to support then the proper crisis responders, and then to check and to follow up with some actions. What we have done, we have an automatic classifier of text and images. The text classifier is multilingual, so we used 32,000 data from historic events in 10 different languages that we annotated. We tried to cover different alphabets, so we cover a bit globally, and then we use embeddings, multilingual and pre-trained embeddings, to extend the semantic of our model. So if we have to show as a very silly example, if I have the word cat and this is transformed into a number 0.1, if I have the word gato in Spanish, this will have the same number, 0.1. In this way, we are able to extend the languages and the semantic because we cover pretty well the different languages. And so with this model, we detected if a text is talking about an impact or not. So if it talks about damages, people injured in different sentences, then we start looking at the names and the combination of words that can define a terms. And in that case, we found it. And also attached to the same message, there was picture that has been classified by our classifier as relevant for the earthquake. So with these two proofs, we were able to actually tell Chiara that, yes, we think there is also a dam in Syria that has been impacted.
Thanks a lot. That answers the question. I think I understand more clearly. I did have a question about the data models, but I think or the language models, but I think you've kind of covered it now. So I'll jump just to the chat for the sake of time. Katerina asked, how are you addressing challenges of data interoperability when integrating modern social media features in legacy platforms, especially in the context of real-time analytics and user experience, such as live streams, chats, and even more advanced AI-driven content? Does it make sense?
I think yes. I think yes. And what we do, because as I said, we want to have our platform to serve crisis responders. So and we have to define the boundaries of our platform and our system. We wanted to be as flexible as possible. Also because social media, in my opinion, are here to stay. They will last forever. But today we have Twitter. Tomorrow we have something else. There is a new social media. There will be some other bottom-up initiative providing data. So I think this is what also the question is referring to. So our platform is able to process text and images and to annotate it automatically. The part before is we let the part before to the single group. For instance, the flood teams is generating forecast and areas where they think something may happen. So I take then name of locations and I start listening to social media or to Twitter or some other tests that we have done. Even with Jorge, we tried to get some data from. I tried to get some data from CrowdTangle during events, but we extracted then text. So once you have the sentence, then the data are all the same. As how we try to stay up to date or to cope with this new.
Got it.
Platform.
Thanks a lot. I see George's hand is up too. He's ready to jump in the conversation.
But that's a good bridge, I think, George. You can of course respond to the discussion and join the discussion that we are having right now. But also we are curious to learn from you. So we are talking about the quality of data all the time. And as we well know, is on social media. One concern is also about quality of information, or even you can talk about disinformation and rumors and all that. Valerio is sometimes referring to that, not explicitly, but to that quality of the data. So what's your take on that? But again, feel free to also reflect on the discussion that we are having right now. But what's your take on that disinformation and rumors? And also, hey, should that be of more of a concern for the policymakers than it is right now?
Yeah, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for having me. I'm going to go back a bit, to what Valerio was just saying, and to the question posed by Katerina, because I think it's a very important question. And the reality is that we only have access to the data that platforms make available. So, in the case of Twitter, they have an API that used to be free for researchers. Now it's not anymore. We have CrowdTangle for Meta products, which is a text-based query that allows you to extract information. On Mastodon, on Fediverse, you already have APIs that allow you to, but for instance, for Telegram and other applications, we do not have access. So without that access, we are blind to that information. So this is a situation that I actually think that bridges with your question, because under the Digital Services Act, which is now in place and is going to be in full force from the beginning of the year, platforms, very large online platforms and search engines will have to give more data and more ways to access the data to researchers and to, well, the public at large. I am the co-chair of the crisis response subgroup of the European Commission, the Permanent Task Force on the Code of Practice on Disinformation. And of course, that disinformation during crisis is something that is a problem. I think that your first question, Valerio, I understood it totally on a different scope, which was how can official data be authoritative if, for instance, you have a state actor that is trying to not tell the whole story to the population, for instance, which is something that we see in some regimes and in some situations. We've seen it in Mozambique. We have seen it a bit in Turkey as well. So, and for you to have an idea, immediately after the earthquake, conspiracy theories regarding that this was an American submarine that caused the earthquake because of the war in Ukraine. And yes, it gets crazy, but the thing is that this information is also part of the noise that we have to filter. So this information is a huge problem. That the fact that we are allowing in some platforms this information to run rampant is also going to hinder these efforts. And this is something that at a European Commission level, especially on the task force, on the permanent task force, on the Code of Practice in Disinformation, but also on the Digital Services Act, is being taken into account. Of course, that is a collaborative effort. The code is a voluntary commitment. So for you to have an idea, Twitter was one of the signatories, and after Elon Musk bought it, they just dropped out of the code. Under Article 45, if I'm not mistaken, there will be a mandate for the platforms to have these voluntary crisis response mechanisms that are going to be also included, because we made sure that natural disasters such as the earthquakes and floods are going to be included as a crisis. So, not only political advertising or political elections, but also that natural disasters are part of the definition of what a crisis is. I hope that I answered your questions.
Yeah, definitely. And but then also you raise sort of a concern is that hey, we also relying upon the many platforms also by private companies, and again that brings that raises a lot of other issues and concerns. What's your take on policy and policy makers when it comes to regulation, for example, of, well, maybe also the data? In terms of implementing fact check, for example, but also regulating the very platforms of that. What's your take on that?
Well, our opinion is that especially with the DSA is really a strong body of legislation, and it's biting, because if platforms do not abide by it, they will be able to be fined between 1% and 10% of their revenue. So it's not something that and the total worldwide revenue, not just the European one. And we have a commissioner until now, which is Breton, that is very adamant, to enforce these things. On the other hand, yes, we are dependent on private platforms, and private platforms exist for profit. So we have to take that into account. And so any discussions that are being had at the moment are having, in focus that researchers such as Valerio, such as the Joint Research Center, and supported by entities like ours that also do research on this information. And for instance, for you to have an idea, in Portugal and in Spain, as soon as a fire starts, we start monitoring social media so that we can give that information to authorities, and we provide areas of interest for media so that there's no disinformation regarding the areas, and we automate that information with Waze so that the roads are virtually digitally cut so that people do not drive there. So there's a lot of integration of systems that we depend on private platforms. To get these platforms to at least give data and give raw data is already a great good step. Let's see how the enforcement of this comes in the beginning of 2024. For us, for instance, when what comes to Twitter, we are now a bit blind. We can only do manual search. We cannot do automated search like we used to. And I want to go back to something which is I think that is also very important, which is nothing of this is possible without having practitioners and researchers working together. And this lack of common language that Valerio talked about is very real. And we need to find ways, all of us need to find ways of sometimes lowering a bit our speech, in our technical talk, just to have a common ground of communication, because that really makes results, as we've seen with the example that Valerio gave about the earthquake in Turkey.
Thank you. 100% on the same page. And hopefully webinars like this will also contribute to that mutual understanding, right? And create a common, maybe not even common language, but common sense making process of of data and data platforms. Nathan, you popped up. Follow up.
Well, I was just
remark or question.
Well, and if there's questions in the audience, just post them in the chat or raise a hand. I mean, we certainly have come across that in the Links project. I mean, it took maybe the first year and a half of the project just to speak the same language across the researchers and some of the emergency management professionals that were involved in the project. And even now, still the terminology can be a bit of a conflict for us. But I wanted to ask George, I wanted to go back on something you said about you talked about there's an important to have this dialogue between practitioners, the needs there, and the scientists, and you also rely, and the policymakers, and you also rely, and this I think goes to one of the last questions, but you also rely a lot on these private organizations. So are there good examples, and this goes, I guess, for all of you, all the panelists, are there good examples in your experience of dialogue taking place between your entities and these private service providers or solution providers, some of the platform providers? And is their interest, or what is their interest? Is it genuine? Is it sort of altruistic? Is it nice to have pictures of them helping disaster managers on their websites? What is the experience there from your side?
I'll jump on this first. It's a great question, Nate. The bottom line answer is we don't know. It depends from it depends from platform to platform. It depends on the person that you are talking with. I have to say that under the code of practice, we have weekly meetings with the platforms that are there, and they are very open to cooperate. But the thing is that we are dealing with the policy team, and usually the information that we need is not from that team, it's from other teams, and so the process is not as fast as we wish it could. As an example, as soon as the Ukraine war started, or the invasion of Russia to Ukraine started, we had a task force, and we were able actually to have channels open with all the platforms and saying, okay, this content is false, it should be demoted or it should be taken out, and a crisis response mechanism was set up. But this was just like one exception. So, this really works on a case-by-case basis. And that's why I think that, under the Digital Services Act, when they are going to be fined, if they don't provide the data and if they don't open these channels and they don't support fact checkers and the researchers, then the things are going to be more open. Until now, it really depends on who your contact is, who is the person that you're talking to, and how big of a media exposure you can give them, if they cooperate with you, basically.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. That's all my questions for the moment. Kees, I think you're muted. Sorry.
I'm muted. Yeah, sorry for that. So yeah, maybe Chiara, also for you to join that discussion. Maybe also about disinformation, and also the role of the private sector in terms of their platforms. You started talking about the coping capacity of member states and also those societal issues. So from that perspective, what is your, also in relation to policymaking, what is your take on that issue?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question, because we experienced that also with Valerio and the task force here that Jorge mentioned before at the GRC on disinformation, for example, that was crucial during the Turkey and Syria earthquake, because unfortunately also on social media that was challenging to retrieve data also from this initiative for that area, because there is also the uncontrolled side of Syria that is not covered by the services, etc. But a lot of disinformation was taking place on the several social media platforms, saying that the humanitarian support was not provided to the uncontrolled area because of the European Commission didn't want to provide support. And this was growing in the social media, and the colleagues were able to retrieve all this information. So also in crisis management, there is a huge amount of disinformation, mostly affecting the most vulnerable communities. So, and also to spread all this kind of very bad behavior, also for providing humanitarian support. So all this collaboration coming from also from volunteers that sometimes know better the field, they come from the also useful from the affected area, etc., can provide very useful information. So in this collaboration with all the sectors, also with the private sectors that has been strongly involved, also in providing, for example, data also for the movements from the migration and the evacuation taking place, monitored by the use of the social media. So all this information coming from all the potential sources are useful to understand how the crisis evolves, and also how we can provide a more effective response from the humanitarian point of view.
Yeah, no, you're very interesting, and so I recognize a lot also from talking to experts in the Links project. Maybe sort of a blunt question and broad, but we sometimes also notice that, hey, the practitioners and the professionals in those organizations, they know and they are aware, and sometimes they also are developing expertise in this field. But hey, they really also are looking for their own organization and a sort of an organizational change. So basically, what is needed for those organizations to indeed embrace the things that you are bringing to the table, Chiara? What's your take on that? Knowing also the field a bit and talking to the professionals in their organization. So what kind of new organizational routines, I guess that's my question, do we need in order to move in that direction?
Yeah, it's also to recognize the role that they are playing and to provide provide them the deserved visibility in the chain. For example, also in the Humanitarian Partnership Week that is held in Geneva since years now, and we strongly collaborate to that. So that it's a gathering for thousands of humanitarians, but there is a whole dedicated sector of this conference dedicated to the private sector on how we can foster our collaboration in this field, because this is really also from the technology point of view, they really can provide us drivers for technology to support the effectiveness of crisis management. So there are so many potential rooms and platforms already taking place for collaboration. So I strongly would invite them to join, as also different private from the private sector supported us for the Turkey and Syria, and they presented the experience. We invited them to present the experience at this humanitarian conference. So it's an important platform also for this sector.
Yeah, a great enabler, and then also for collaboration, but also sharing good practices, experiences, and right. So to be able to create that organizational routine in a way that is needed. Nathan, looking at you again. Any questions at the chat or?
I popped up again.
May I jump in
please,
and complement on these last questions? Yes, I think when we talk about the use of data and to the processing of data, and the data serve to decision maker. So in that case, I think, and this is also answering the question that you posed about the reorganization of these crisis responders organizations. So I think that we have to nurture or to create, or I envision in the future, some figures in a crisis room that are, for instance, like Jorge, or like some certified cert in the United States, where you have a figure which is an expert in the domain of crisis management and is also technological savvy, can use, does understand what is an artificial intelligence model, what could be the biases. And this needs to be a figure with proper training. So we need to have some sort of training for this person, certification for this person. Then, not me, but the European Commission, or an operational tool that has the mandate to respond, and that also has the liability to protect people or to not expose people to disaster, can have a service level agreement with this type of figures. I cannot tell people go out in the earthquake and take a picture. I cannot. We cannot, and no one will do that. But through this organization and this figure, we can mitigate the risk, and we can still collect valuable data. The other thing is that I wanted to point out is that I think also that the European Commission Data Act is going into the right direction. In that is that we need to have access to data. This is the base point that we have. For instance, now with Facebook, you cannot access the data. You could with Twitter, and this was the only one. Now you cannot anymore, at least not if you don't have a contract. We had to have a specific contract with Twitter to get the data and to continue get the data. With Facebook is not possible. With other private data is not possible. The Data Act is going into the direction of explaining or defining, identifying when in certain circumstances where they have to allow governments or crisis responders to get the data. And it is specified in a comma that we are talking about emergency and disaster, natural disaster cases. Right. So this is a good step in a good direction. I hope, as Jorge, that it will be applied in the proper way, and also that they can actually, the private companies, because they've shown us during COVID emergency, We had Google providing mobility data. We have some good initiatives going in this direction with Meta Data for Good, for instance. They provide to crisis responders or international organizations dynamic data that are respecting privacy, but they are informative and dynamic. So I think that collaboration and regulation has to be two steps to take in the future.
Thank you. Nathan?
Well, I think actually his Valerio's comments there somewhat touched on the question that was in the chat already.
Yeah.
And I think we're running low on time here. So rather than open it up again, I think it's also a good ending point if you agree, Kees.
I do. Yeah. No, Nathan, you can have the final words, but
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
It's a long day today, 5:30 webinar. Well, we wanted to say thanks to the panelists for taking the time. I know it's the end of the day, but it also allowed us to make sure people could tune in and after work. And I think we had a really nice discussion. We've met all of you before in different contexts, but nice to have you here together. And it feeds into what we're doing, finalizing the last steps of links.
Yeah.
So really appreciate that. And Kees, thank you for moderating the group here.
Really
just say to the audience, we will have if you're interested in links, you can always check out links, project.eu, or we're finalizing the project in the last couple of months. So there'll be a lot of events you can engage with us at and dissemination opportunities and to work with us. We'll be in Rome the 16th and 17th of October, and we'll send out, there'll be through our networks, there'll be some registration links for that event sent out soon. And and I hope that we also get a chance to collaborate more with you, Valerio, and Jorge and Chiara through maybe your task forces or whatever. We generated quite a lot of interesting outcomes in this project on these topics, a lot on also the social side of it and the governance side of things that can be interesting to discuss. But so I'll just say thanks, and thanks also to all the participants and that tuned in, and to CMind for putting this together. And George, I think you posted something in there too. Oh, thanks. You answered the question, George. Appreciate it.
No final solution, but
yeah. So I think that's it, huh? Yeah. Have a good afternoon, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.